Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is The Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all, Canada's most irreverent talk show here on this Tuesday, June 18th, 2024. Great to have you aboard the program here. We are going to cover a little bit of ground today. We're going to talk about anti-Semitism on campus. We'll talk about ESG scores and why going woke for corporations does not shockingly mean making more money. I know, so hard to believe, right? Well, we'll talk about the why that is. But first and foremost, I want to talk about Justin Trudeau. Now, he is doing the Desperation Tour. He has been doing every podcast imaginable. He's been talking to all sorts of people that aren't interested in pushing back. And he also did a rare interview, rare for a Prime Minister of Canada, on CBC's Power and Politics. Now, I was on Power and Politics a few weeks ago. It's a fun show. David Cochrane, as far as CBC hosts go, is, I think, one of the very fair-minded ones there, notwithstanding Trudeau at one point gave him some poutine, but we won't hold that against him forever. The thing about it, though, is that Power and Politics is like a political punditry show. So they're supposed to have people talking about what the Prime Minister is doing. So when Justin Trudeau gets on there, it's clear that he's just trying to find any way that he could possibly turn his fortunes around. And those fortunes are not exactly great. You may have seen the most recent polling over the weekend, courtesy of Abacus Data, finding the Conservatives with a 20-point lead over the Liberals. 20-point lead. Now, that's massive. That is the Conservatives about to take 42% of the vote, the Liberals down at 22%, the NDP not that far behind the Liberals, to be perfectly frank. And Justin Trudeau has been forced to account for why this is. But, as he told David Cochrane, the polls, they don't really mean anything. Don't worry about that. Take a look.
Despite that optimistic picture, the country is still angry. You can see it in the mood. And increasingly, Prime Minister, a lot of them are mad at you, right? I know you say you want to beat Pierre Poilievre. You keep coming back to that. But what if you are the reason the Liberals can't beat the Conservatives in the next election? Where do you factor that into your thought process?
Well, I think, first of all, Canadians are not in a decision mode right now. What you tell a pollster if they ever manage to reach you is very different from the choice Canadians end up making in an election campaign. And fundamentally, and it's not just Canada, but everywhere around the world, and indeed I was talking with other leaders at the G7 and in Switzerland at the Peace Conference for Ukraine, everywhere people are struggling with high inflation, with cost of living issues, with interest rates, with housing challenges, with childcare challenges, all these things. We are doing better than many countries. Doesn't make a difference to someone who can't pay for their groceries, but the way people are everywhere facing a certain amount of frustration. And I truly believe that as we choose to step up on solving those challenges, to contrast with a political vision that so far consists from the Conservatives of just making people more angry and saying everything is broken, I know Canadians are pragmatic people who focus on solutions, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing.
He reminds me when he says, Canadians aren't in a decision mode. He reminds me of Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, telling me back in Davos when I wanted to ask her a question of, I'm in a quiet period right now. You just come up with some desperate reason by which you don't need to answer the question. But Canadians are not in decision mode, which is true. The election is not yet happening. He is basically saying there that, when Canadians are going to vote, that's when they're all of a sudden going to come back home to daddy. Justin Trudeau is daddy in this equation, so take from that what you will. But Trudeau is basically saying that when it's time to vote, Canadians will really realize then in decision mode that the Liberals are the ones that have their back, that Justin Trudeau is the guy. And the conversations they have with every single pollster going for basically a year now, those conversations are not an accurate representation of how Canadians feel. Funnily enough, when the polls show the Conservatives beating the Liberals, the polls aren't valid. When the polls back in the day used to show the Liberals up ahead, the polls were showing the Liberals up ahead. That was the weird sort of way that politicians tend to view polls. When they're in their favor, they are good. When they're not in their favor, they're just polls. The only poll that matters is the one on election day. The reason I bring this up, though, is because the Liberal desperation is quite something. And I think Liberals increasingly, as I've remarked time and time again, are going to have to realize that Justin Trudeau is the problem and start mounting a campaign to get rid of him if they want to, because he is not going on his own. And again, I'm not telling the Liberals what to do. I'm not urging anyone to be removed from office. I'm just saying that if the Liberals want him gone, he has not shown any indication that he will be going anywhere of his own volition. And it's interesting when you see the way the Liberals managed to fumble pretty much every single issue. Foreign interference, an issue that could have been one where there was political unanimity, could have been one in which everyone reached across the aisle, has even then become a partisan football. You had Elizabeth May the other day saying, "Where's the bar?" Sorry, no. What she said something about foreign interference. You also had Jagmeet Singh saying something as well, and you had these two opposing views, basically. Elizabeth May saying, well, there's really nothing there and I'm not worried about it. And Jagmeet Singh saying, yeah, I've got some issues with people in Parliament. And Justin Trudeau refusing to say anything, refusing to say if any Liberal members of Parliament were implicated, instead turning it around on the opposition. But I wanted to show this clip. This is a clip that is rather fascinating to me, because Trudeau is talking. This is the same interview he did yesterday with David Cochrane on Power and Politics. And I won't do a wind-up here. I'll analyze it afterwards, but pay very close attention to how he speaks in this.
But is it tenable to just go on without names attached to some of these allegations? I mean, Jagmeet Singh has said that there's nobody in his caucus he needs to worry about. Can you say the same thing with comfort and clarity?
I hadn't known that Jagmeet said that. I would be wary of any party leader drawing any sort of conclusion like that.
Including Mr. Singh?
I would be wary of any party leader drawing any conclusion like that. There is a range of issues around foreign interference that our security agencies, that our various institutions are engaged in. We know that foreign actors are trying to interfere in all different parties in many different ways, and protecting the integrity of our parliamentary system and of people who choose to step forward in Parliament from false or misleading accusations that may well be the goal of some of those countries wishing to interfere, is requiring a level of thoughtfulness that is not always conducive to selling newspapers or headlines, but is what a responsible government must do to continue to engage in foreign interference. And I'll remind you, we are the government that has brought in more measures, more structures, more ways to deal with foreign interference than any other, because no other government ever did anything on that.
So it's fascinating to me because on one hand, first off, he was just remarkably unprepared, because Jagmeet Singh had said that quite a while before that interview, as I understand it. And Justin Trudeau is seemingly so baffled by that. Oh, no party is immune from this. That would include his own. Well, why has he not made any moves? Why has no one been removed from caucus? Why, on one hand, is he saying, yes, no one should be feel safe here, and on the other hand, sending out Dominic LeBlanc to say, well, we've got concerns with how the NSI COP came to its conclusions. We've got concerns with the report. The Liberals are looking to be the party that has stood to benefit the most from foreign interference in Canadian democracy. Part of this is because foreign actors that want to infiltrate Canadian institutions will, of course, back the winner, which for the last 3 elections has been the Liberals. But more crucially, and I think this is the really significant point here, the Liberals have been the most ideologically on side, certainly when it comes to China and China's interests. The Liberals have not taken the view on China that most nations that value their sovereignty would, and that certainly in the past the Conservatives have taken up. So again, I'm not at all saying that foreign interference does not affect different parties. I'm saying that if you're foreignly interfering, if you're an interfering foreigner, whatever the term is, if you are trying to meddle in Canadian democracy, as I've remarked, you're not exactly going to get much bang for your buck in going after Elizabeth May or Jagmeet Singh. So you're basically going to go after one of the two parties that has historically held victory in this country, that has held office. And in the last 3 elections, the Liberals have been the winners. So this is where Canadians should look at this and be very, very nervous about a prime minister that is not willing to be transparent. A prime minister who could, as we talked about yesterday, on his own, effectively with a stroke of a pen, disclose the names, release the unredacted report. But instead, he has chosen not to. So Justin Trudeau, when he comes out there and says, oh, well, Canadians are not in a decision mode right now, that's the only reason we're not coming across well in the polls. No, Canadians are not supporting you and your party in the polls because you have just been bungling every single file that you have had your hands on. You've had the reverse Midas touch for, I'd say, certainly the last 5 years. Some would say, the last 9 years that the Liberals have been in power. And foreign interference, an issue that really comes down to the core question of Canada's democracy. And we're going to be delving into this on Thursday in a longer interview with Brian Lee Crowley. This is something where the Liberals have once again decided to turn a blind eye to it. They have turned a blind eye to it. They have chosen to keep things shrouded in secrecy instead of this government that said it was going to be the most transparent government to ever happen in the face of the earth. Amazing how far we have fallen from that. The government that said it was going to overhaul access to information and transparency and openness, and has now fought Canadians in court, has fought the Speaker of the House in court, has fought time and time again to keep the government closed off, to keep information closed off. And it isn't just on foreign interference. It was on SNC-Lavalin. It's on their carbon tax. They don't even want Canadians to see the economic analysis of the carbon tax, for crying out loud. A government that can't be transparent about its tax policy cannot be transparent about anything else. And this is why Canadians have, for several other reasons, turned on a government that was once welcomed with such open arms. I want to turn to an issue that has become very near and dear to my heart, not as a Jewish person, but as someone who has a great deal of love for the Jewish people and a great deal of sympathy for all they've had to endure over the years and over the last 9 months in particular. It's no longer news to talk about anti-Semitism on campus. Things that a year ago or 2 years ago would have been front page news are now relegated to the back pages because we just expect on universities people to say horrendous things about Israel and the Jewish people. Just last week, we learned that McGill University's dissidents, their anti-Israel group, were going to be hosting a summer camp. Oh, that sounds so charming. What summer camp is this? Well, it is a summer camp for quote-unquote revolutionaries. And this is the youth summer program. Now, when I went to summer camp, I think the graphic might have been kids playing with bubbles, or kids, playing hopscotch and the chalk, or maybe kids doing that parachute game where you lift the parachute up in the air and you sit under it. But these youth summer campers, I see them all wearing keffiyahs. They're reading. I don't know if those are Qurans or if it's the new Hunger Games book that Suzanne Collins has coming out. One of them is holding what appears to be, it's a firearm of some kind. I don't know what kind exactly. It's a little blurry there, maybe an AK-47 of sorts, but this is what they're promoting. This summer camp has been widely condemned, although by all accounts, it will still be going on because it doesn't happen with any official standing. Heck, maybe they'll even get some Canada summer jobs funding from the government. Who knows? But one group that has been conspicuously silent throughout all of this has been the group you would expect to be the most vocal about this, the Jewish studies programs on university campuses. Now, when I was at university, I took a class on the Jewish history of North America, which was a fascinating class. I learned a great deal about how integrated Jews were in the historic and cultural fabric of Canadian and American society. And there were a lot of programs just like that around the country, and a lot of professors in these spaces that have not been speaking up about this. Barbara Kay wrote about this in a piece in the National Post, where she is one of my favorite columnists, and I suspect one of yours as well if you read there. Barbara, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
So I'll start. Let's accept your premise at face value, because I think you're very correct about this. I have not seen a large and vocal condemnation from these or any other academic groups. But is this coming from a tacit or explicit agreement with these activists, or is it coming from fear that these professors do not want to stick their necks out and be even further marginalized?
Well, first I should say that although Jewish studies, you're correct, the Jewish studies departments have been institutionally pretty mute. There have been many individual Jewish studies academics who have been quite vocal, but they are vocal as individuals or as part of some very ad hoc networks, academic writers networks, and they write op-eds and they, write for all kinds of publications. I have no core.
But they tend to be the pariahs for doing so.
Well, either let's just say that they're out there on their own. I mean, I don't think they're condemned in their, professionally. I don't think they face cancellation within their departments. But institutionally, the Jewish Studies departments and the Association of Jewish Studies, which is an American organization, I'm not sure if it covers Canada as well, they have been not only not vocal in opposition to all this anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish activity, but they are officially, one might say, sympathetic to the anti-Zionist movement. Many of them, some of them are active in the BDS movement. I'll give you one example. A former rabbi in my synagogue in Montreal described this to a group of us at a learning day at our synagogue. He said he had when he'd been a rabbi and then he had taught in the Jewish Studies department at Drew University. And he said he went to, this was 2 years ago, he went to the annual conference of Jewish Studies, the Association of Jewish Studies, which is for that discipline. And he said the theme of the conference was justice. And he said the major push of the conference was justice for the Palestinians. And he described one exhibit, an artistic exhibit that was a series of photographs of Palestinian children, only you didn't see their faces, you just saw their outstretched arms, and on their arms they had, with Sharpies written, tattooed numbers, which I don't have to tell you is a Holocaust inversion tactic of just the lowest and the really very undignified and very hurtful, needless to say, to those who remember the Holocaust or who have had relatives killed in the Holocaust. So this idea of using the Holocaust against ourselves in order to whip up a sentiment of a very acute, level for Palestinians, as opposed to, and this is the kind of thing you see quite often. It comes under the heading of what I would call pathological altruism, in which you're so concerned with the harms that your side of a conflict is causing to the other side that you won't take your own side. What was that definition of a liberal? Someone who won't take his own side in an argument. Anyways. So,
Yeah, and I would also point out too that studying something, women's studies, gender studies, Jewish studies, all of these things, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is a support for the group being studied. I think, one example of this, I forget the name of the university, but there was like some men's studies department that was launched, and you looked at the faculty for it, and it was like every single one of them, I think, probably hated men more than anything else in the world. And, Jewish studies, you do see a lot of Jewish professors in there, but a lot of them are not necessarily Zionists. And again, nor should they be necessarily. There shouldn't be a litmus test if you're able to teach the material and teach it well. But the reality there is that a lot of these departments, a lot of the social sciences in general, have all been taken over by this oppressed dynamic. And when you can't even teach math or chemistry without talking about decolonizing the curricula, certainly in Jewish studies, you're seeing those very same dynamics. And I think that's why a lot of these departments have been so silent on this.
well, I agree with you, and I think the whole rubric of intersectionality, in which Jews are routinely excluded. They are not considered. Intersectionality is, of course, the intersectionality of all victims, the oppressed. And Jews are never included in the category of the oppressed. They are always part of the oppressor group. So it sort of conflates Jews with their state. And as you say, many Jews are not particularly Zionist. But when Jews in authority over other students, or in a position of authority over students, and they're in a Jewish studies program, become actively anti-Zionist, or are part of the BDS movement, or are teaching anti-Zionism rather than teaching it as part of, history. And here's the situation today, and here is here is when Zionism, the concept, started, and who started it, and who was for it, and who was against it. That's history. But once you already have a Jewish state, and Zionism obviously won the argument, you can't keep arguing that Zionism is a curse, as Naomi Klein has called it. You cannot say it must be ended. How do you end Zionism? You would have to end Israel in order to end Zionism. So it's a very different kettle of fish. Last night, the Monk debates, Andrew, I don't know if you saw them, but anyways, wonderful international lawyer Natasha Hausdorff teamed up with Douglas Murray, the incredible Douglas Murray, and they were discussing this very thing. And Natasha said, "Look, you don't have to be a Zionist, but think of it as this way. It's like if a mother and a father, or sorry, if two parents, if a man and a woman get married and they say they don't want to have children, they both agree they don't want to have children, but by accident they have a child. You don't agree that it's okay to murder the child. I mean, because they didn't want it, right? Like, so we have a state with 7 million Jews in it. That's half the world's population. And for anybody in Jewish studies today to be arguing that not only was Zionism a mistake, but it's a mistake that has to be rectified, then you have to be very careful with your words. What do you mean? It was a mistake, and now the state of Israel is illegitimate for that reason. I'd be happy if all kinds of movements that ended up in national movements or that had been considered illegitimate before they became nations. Israel was created as a nation along with many other nations in the Middle East. Nationalism was not a thing a century ago, and it became a thing. So this idea that you can just loosely play with the idea of, Zionism, big mistake, let's try something else. And the something else that a lot of Jewish studies professors are into now is this thing called diasporism, which is, Zionism was a big mistake. You know what? We need to be Jews who we repudiate Zionism, and it's good. Jews were meant to live in exile because their rationale is it is unnatural for Jews to have power over anybody else. Okay, for other people.
When you have a very, very extreme subset of Orthodox Jews that believes that, but it's an incredible, incredible minority.
It's so fringe that I never even include the Natura Carta people are like they're crazy people. I consider them literally crazy. They are living in such a bubble and they have no influence whatsoever, except insofar as they are used as tools. By the Palestinian ists. And but no Jew I know ever even mentions them in a calculus of where are we going and what's happening in the world. They are beyond the pale, so beyond the pale that Orthodox Jews want nothing to do with them, and even Chabad and all these other people, they're off the map. But we're talking now about very mainstream people who do have influence and authority in universities. They're academics. They are in, institutions like Hillel and all kinds of places where young Jews look to them as models and authority figures. And they're saying, we should be happy in exile. We should not have power over other people. We've misused it. It's okay, but everybody else is allowed to have power over Jews. I mean, if we're should be happy to live in exile, then we're basically saying we are contracting out our right to have power over anybody. But you can have power over us. You can have power over us, but we can't have power over anybody else. So how did that work out for us throughout history? Not so well.
Not that, I was about to ask you, what Jews think of a certain subject. And then as I was doing so, the old joke of, 3 Jews and 5 opinions come to mind, is that, Jews can't even necessarily agree with themselves, let alone each other on a lot of matters.
True, but the upside of that is, it's both an upside and a downside. The upside is we grant anybody, in Israel, here, any Jew can say what's on his mind or her
Mhm.
mind without fear of getting bumped off or even spat at or, getting doxxed on. I mean, we allow perfect freedom of expression within our people.
Mhm.
And our people, we are bonded, not as Christians are by belief. We are bonded by peoplehood. So we admit to, without resentment, yeah, there's super orthodox and there's totally secular, there's atheists, and there's this and that. We don't care. We don't care. What we care about is your commitment to Jewish peoplehood and to furthering the healthy interests of the Jewish people. Now, that doesn't mean you have to support Israel and everything that Israel does. You don't have to support Zionism. You don't have to support any of that. But it doesn't give you license to align yourself with the enemies of the Jewish people and to say, yeah, you've got the right idea. Yeah, eliminating Israel, good idea. And that's what, these groups like Independent Jewish Voices and um, Jewish Voices for Peace, they're using their status as Jews to join in the chorus of voices that wish Jews would disappear from the face of the earth, and they are abetting them and giving comfort to them and saying, speaking as a Jew, or yeah, my grandmother, who's dead unfortunately in the Holocaust, would have approved. That's something that you see people
Mhm.
like. I've seen Jews say, "Oh, she definitely would have been on BDS. She definitely would have been ashamed of what Israel's doing." I don't think so. I think
Well,
any.
these are the same as the Christians that say, Jesus would have been trans or something. Like you see all
Yeah,
of this
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah, yeah,
weird
yeah.
revisionism. But I wanted to ask you about that, Barbara, because there is, to use the language and worldview of the left here, which talks about privilege as basically meriting or taking away the merit of your position. A lot of the Jews that do this, I've seen, are ones that have tremendous amounts of privilege. They are
Mhm.
Jews that have not had to deal with anti-Semitism, or at least not that I would see. They're Jews that oftentimes are coming from very upper middle class, if not outright wealthy families. And you see this in other groups as well. I mean, the number of like environmental activists whose like parents are, these,
Yeah.
billionaires or something is insane. But that doesn't really matter when you're saying the quote unquote right things, in the same way that all of the indigenization of curricula now and the importance of connecting to your people to history doesn't apply to Jews, because Jews are also bound by their history and by their connection to the land that we now call Israel. But
Yeah.
that deep connection doesn't matter when you have been maligned as the quote unquote oppressor.
That's right. I mean, you can say, as some diasporists do, they say, "Oh yeah, all that stuff about next year in Jerusalem and my heart belongs to Zion and all that. That's just romantic stuff. It's like a metaphor. It doesn't literally mean that Jews have to be attached to the land of Israel." Well, sorry, but it does. And if you want to detach yourself from the Jews, I don't care. Say I'm not a Jew anymore. I'm out of here. Fine. All I ask is, you know what? Don't dump on the rest of us, and don't help other people who would really like to see us disappear. Is that too much to ask, really? And don't say, speaking as a Jew. Even Trotsky in the Soviet Union, his name used to be Lev Bronstein, but he didn't say, speaking as a Jew, I'm a party member and I believe that Jews should be persecuted people. Like, just decide one or the other. I'm not with you. I'm out of this, people. Goodbye, good luck, and I'll just go my own way. But the privileged Jews you're talking about, yes, they're the university crowd. They want to be part of the herd. They've bought into the whole intersectional thing. They've bought the whole and they're very full of self-righteousness. They see themselves as the new prophets, and they are using they're weaponizing their status, their sociological status as Jews, to abet a perniciously anti-Semitic movement. And then there's the Jews that are just plain ignorant, and they're what I call useful idiots, who go along because they get all their news from TikTok, and they're incurious. They don't know anything about history. They know nothing, and they're just they're foolish, silly people. They need a cause. They're looking for something. They have no connection to their Jewish history or past or communities. No deep connection, anyways. And they don't have a cause, so they're looking. And in a way, they feel this is a social justice cause. They've been trained to think that way. They think that Israel is a colonialist state, which it isn't. It isn't an apartheid. These are all libels, but they believe them. Why shouldn't they? Their propaganda mill, the BDS crowd, their propaganda mill is phenomenal because they don't have to worry about studying or doing anything constructive in life. This is their whole life is relentless propagandizing against Israel and the Jews.
Well, I appreciate it very much. And like I've said to you in the past, Barbara, I'm so grateful you continue to use your voice in the way that you do when there are so many costs to doing so in this day and age. And I appreciate it very much. Barbara Kay, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right. Thanks again. Always good to chat with Barbara Kay. No natural segue from that to our next subject. I was going to try to think of one, but I just couldn't. So I'm moving on. We're doing, when I used to work in talk radio, I liked you could just throw to the commercial break and not have to worry about the segue. But I do want to talk about ESG because this is something we hear a lot of: environmental, social governance. It's often done by companies that want to look woke and say that they're being progressive. And you see it tied in with things like the Sustainable Development Goals and all of these other things. And you often hear people sell ESG because every company wants a good ESG score. People saying that it actually is good for business too, that it's not selling out the bottom line, it's not negative to the shareholders. Well, a new study from the Fraser Institute casts doubt on that. It says there is not, in fact, any evidence supporting a positive correlation between ESG ratings and stock market returns. This looks at 310 companies on the Toronto Stock Exchange. The study author joins me now, Steven Globerman, Senior Fellow at the Fraser Institute. Steven, good to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So for people that aren't as familiar with this, what is an ESG score and what are companies doing to boost their number?
That rate companies' performance along those dimensions: environmental activity, social activity, which is related to who you're hiring, how much you're paying your employees, and governance, which is related to how the company is run. And the rating agencies use different specific measures along those three dimensions, and then aggregate these measures to come up with an overall rating for a company. And companies pay for these rating services because, in part, they use it to promote their performance, their sustainability performance, in just to use a broad term to cover those dimensions. Investment managers use those ratings to promote their ESG mutual funds and exchange traded funds to generate business from investors who are concerned about those issues when they place their money in different types of assets.
And you've looked at 310 companies on the TSX. You've looked at their stock market returns and find no correlation whatsoever, positive or negative, between the two, correct?
Well, let me just clarify one point, which is an important point. What we look at is the change in the ESG rating, and then we relate that to stock market performance going forward. And the reason that's an important qualification is that a stock price will change because new information about the company's ongoing prospects have changed. So the change in the rating is important because that really can be considered new information about a company's ESG profile. And if investors are really concerned about ESG profile, then it's the new information that they're going to react to. And yes, what we did was we looked at the relationship between the change in the ESG rating of across our sample of companies and the performance, the stock performance, which includes, by the way, dividend payments and any stock splits over the next up to 12 months beyond the rating change, which seems a reasonable amount of time to expect investors to react to that new information. And as you said, there's no statistically significant relationship, meaning any relationship we saw could be due to chance with relative confidence.
As we know, stock market returns themselves can be very fickle. They're often influenced by a company's profitability, but not exclusively so. And you're not looking at a company's financial. You're not looking at a company's profitability specifically. You're looking at the stock market return. So, have you, in other studies you've seen in the U.S., because I know this hasn't really been done in Canada, seen a relationship between changes in ESG scores and how much a company is making, one way or another?
Well, you're quite right that the focus of most of the studies, including our study, our recent study, is on stock market returns. But the reason you want to look at stock market returns is because you can't observe future changes in profitability looking at accounting statements. The stock market return, and particularly the change in the price of a stock, reflects what the broad, millions of investors think is the future profitability outlook for the company. So looking at the stock market, change in the stock market price is really effectively looking at expectations about future profitability, which are not observable if you look at accounting statements. Now, you might say, well, why not do a very long time series study and look at changes in future profitability? That could be another piece of research, but it's not just the stock price change. It's also, because many ESG proponents argue, it reduces the risk of a company. And so it's the risk-adjusted returns that you want to look at, and that goes beyond profitability. And we have controls for that in our study. Controls for the risk profile of the company. So what we're looking at is the stock market's expectation of future profitability adjusted for expected risk.
One of the things that, and I realize you're a scientist, you're following the numbers here. You're not trying to, make the numbers fit a thesis, but there are going to be people that are very hostile to the ESG score and the whole regime there that say, okay, well, there's no point. And there are going to be people that are supportive of it that say, okay, well, it doesn't cost them anything, so it can't hurt.
Well, it does cost, and that's an important point. In fact, there was a piece yesterday in the Globe and Mail where a CEO of a small Canadian company was referencing the significant costs to his company of complying with ESG reporting requirements. So yes, the issue really does ultimately boil down to what are the costs and benefits of setting up a regulatory environment where all this reporting has to be done so ESG ratings can be created, if there doesn't seem to be a relationship between ESG ratings and the basically the efficiency performance of the company.
Yeah, and I think that's a very significant point. And you have, I mean, I've seen this covering the World Economic Forum meetings in Davos. You have all of these companies that are bending over backwards to meet these targets, and they're, integrating with all of these different agencies. And you've created this entire industry on ESG consulting and ESG, like all of this. And people are making huge money on this. The shareholders aren't, though.
The shareholders are not, and of course it raises an obvious question: why are people investing in ESG themed mutual funds? They're paying higher fees to invest in those funds. They don't appear to be getting the net returns that people who are investing in conventional asset categories. Why do they do this? And really, all you can say, I think, with any kind of reasoned analysis, is that there are non-financial benefits that are being realized by these investors. Whether it's feel good that we're doing something good for the environment, or we're addressing income inequality or racial discrimination. That really is very hard to test. Surveys suggest that people do expect to earn higher rates of return, but they're not. And I think That fact needs to be made more widely known. If people continue to want to get psychic benefits or warm glow feelings from how they're investing, that's their business. But they should be informed about what the expected returns will be.
Very well said. People can check out the study for themselves over at fraserinstitute.org, ESG Investing and Financial Returns in Canada. And Steven Globerman, good to talk to you. I appreciate your time today.
Good to talk to you, Andrew.
All right, thank you. That does it for us for today. We'll be back tomorrow with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.